Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
It's a wonderful day here at Around with Randall, and I thank you for taking a moment of your day to join me as we try to look into the future a little bit in thinking about 2025 as I do my annual year to come predictions. I've been somewhat surprised, to be honest, but also kind of proud that over the last couple of years, I've been really in line with some thoughts as to what might be happening for the next year. And so I'm hoping to repeat that again, giving you something to think about as you want to prepare, do well, have a plan, lay out a strategy around what 2025 might look like for you and your organization. Maybe today a few nuggets that might be helpful. When I look at 2025, I'm going to break this up into three major areas, with each area having several predictions. The first is economy, which is going to drive a lot of the thought process on how we look at our donor database. Number two is actual giving, and what I think might happen in particular with some maybe elevated emphasis. And third is just general industry, things that I think the industry is going to be moving toward. So there'll be multiple predictions in each one of these kind of areas that we have to talk about here today. The first is the economy. I think one of the things that we have to start with is probably what will come out in early 2025. And I apologize, but this is spending 3 years studying tax law and as well as really, really enjoying it, is that the tax changes that occurred in 2017 are looking to be sunset if nothing happens by the end of this next year, 2025. With the changes in Congress as well as the presidency coming out of the election in November, we're going to see a real conversation about this. The corporate tax level, the individual tax level, as well as the exemptions in planned giving. This is really, really important because it's going to drive a lot of discussions about how much disposable income people have. Now, on the political side, which I am not going to get into, there is a deficit conversation going on as well. We're going to focus on what this means for philanthropy. If what I think is going to pass, which is a continuation, or at least directionally, a continuation of the kind of the aspects of the 2017 changes, the corporate tax rate will stay a little bit lower, the individual tax rate will probably stay lower, and then we're talking about having a larger exemption for estate giving. All those things are going to make an enormous difference. That's going to drive our economy for a while. That's also going to affect people's disposable income, as we've mentioned. I think that the first outcome from that is that the stock market may go up. And in a minute, I'm going to get to maybe a different way of looking at our larger perspective of the economy and our potential donors, because I think there's something happening that's really important. The second thing is that I believe that these tax policies are going to re-emphasize a couple of really important things that are going to at least be discussed, I'm predicting, from a nonprofit perspective. They're both related around planned giving. Number one is that with the exemption being kept possibly 13,500, maybe growing with inflation as it looks forward, planned giving from a tax perspective for most people isn't a real issue. If you get an exemption of an individual of 12 to 13 to $14 million, most people don't have those kind of assets. Put a couple together, that's 25 or more. That now we're talking about a very small percentage of people. But the biggest conversation is going to be around, which is not directly related to the tax situation, but about donor advised funds. There was a fascinating article that I wrote about in my recent blog, which you can see. I do 2 a week. These are the kind of things I write about when I read stuff that don't reach quite the depth of a podcast, but I think are worthy of something. But this article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy talked about how the size of donor-advised funds has become almost a power political weapon. Because if you make a gift, or if a donor makes a gift to donor-advised funds, it doesn't have to be distributed by whether it's Fidelity or Schwab or a community foundation. A lot of organizations are creating kind of internal donor-advised funds that you don't have to allocate those resources, but they get the tax deduction. The number of dollars sitting on the sidelines in these donor-advised funds is in the hundreds of billions now. The article gets into the discussion about power and wealth, that's giving immense power to community foundations as well as other, nonprofits that are holding these funds, as well as aren't really transferring the wealth to society. And I think this is going to become more of a conversation, in part because there's going to be a pushback that if we have this much exemption in the tax code and people are giving money to donor-advised funds, they shouldn't probably get both sides of the equation, meaning they don't get the benefit for giving it and not having to pay taxes on it, but it not going into doing the community what it's supposed to from a philanthropic perspective. I'm not quite sure I know what the answer is. I do believe that in time there will be a discussion around capping the size of these funds and or a time limit as to how long they can sit on the sidelines. And I would say the same for endowment funds, particularly because places like Harvard, Yale, other huge institutions that have these enormous endowments are sitting on them. Now, the question is that good? There's a lot of give and take here. But I think the overall emphasis is we're going to start seeing conversations about donor-advised funds being held off in the sides too long. And number two, that with the economic pressures that are coming, we'll talk about this in a minute, that planned giving is going to become more and more of a conversation, particularly as we've seen some estimates over the next 25 years. Somewhere between 85 and 90 trillion dollars is going to transfer in generational estates, transitioning when people pass. We already know that about 12 to 13% of that is in nonprofit charity gifts coming out of those estates. I think there's going to be more. And so this is all interesting in terms of how the tax code, the big thing, will affect us. So that's number one. Number two, and they won't all be this long, I apologize, but I geek out a little bit on the tax code because I think it's important in terms of our economic viability as a country and certainly how it affects philanthropy. Number two is the larger scale of the economy. And that's what I'm thinking or calling a K economic recovery. You may or may not have heard of this term. I think it's going to be discussed a lot more, and you should be aware of it. If you think about the letter K, if you start on the left, it has the branches that go up and down to make the K. And in some ways, that's kind of what I think our economic model looks like across the country. There are a number of people who are doing incredibly well right now. The stock market is up, 10, 15, 20% in the last 6 months, and which I did not predict for 2024. And we got a number of people doing well. But if you take the K the other direction, going downward, there are a lot of people who are stressed financially. You look at what's happening from the reporting around defaults in homes, car loans. People are taking out longer loans. I've now seen the first time advertised a 96-month car loan, which I'm like, the only reason you do that is because you lessen your payments so you can afford it. But from a long-term asset perspective, you could be underwater for a long time with a car if you take out the loan that long, with how it might depreciate depending on the car and how much you put down, things of that nature. We also are seeing the highest amount of credit card debt. We've seen the most amount of what they call breakthroughs when it comes to our retirement plans. There is a large segment of our population that is not doing well. But we see the indicators more often than not from the stock market, which is going up. So everybody's doing well, the perception might be. And it's really not that case. So the K economy, the question becomes how thick the two lines are, for my metaphor. I think it's quite thin going up, but it's dramatic. And I think it's quite thick going down, meaning there's a lot more people. What does this mean? I think we will see a continued decrease when it comes to annual giving, that the people who normally do the 25, 50, 100, $250 donations will continue to decrease as we've seen over the last several years. Our gift pyramids are going to change, whether it's an annual gift pyramid change in terms of, how you plan your year, who are your donors, how they slot in, to, which is, by the way, podcasts that I do all the way back into about, I think maybe in the 20s, around how you do metrics. I have charts that I share right there. How do you do this individually every year? To campaigns, if we shift to larger. All this to say, I think we're moving closer and closer to a 97.3 model rather than a 95.5 model. And what I mean by that is that 97% of our dollars may come from only 3% of our people. I believe, and I work with a number of clients in audits and development reviews and kind of the process, figuring out what they should look like and what they should do. I'm using a 95.5 model now to figure out how to help nonprofits get to where they need to go. But I think we're moving to a 97.3 because less people at the bottom are going to be able to do what they've done in the past. Outcomes of this. So if we have less people giving, and we've talked about this a number of times on this podcast, is that, 2002, there were 2/3 of the households making a gift. We're probably below 47% now. So we've lost tens of millions of homes. Less people making a gift, supply and demand, basic economics. The competition for those that are giving is going to become more intense to retain those donors, to attract those donors. So I think that this is going to be even more highly discussed about individualizing stewardship. Technology can help. How do you create an individual message? I received a message, as you are aware. I talk about kind of my life generically. We support the law school I went to. I think it's was one of the seminal moments in my life professionally. Those 3 years drove me a lot of ways to where I am today. I received on National Philanthropy Day an individualized video from the law school to me, actually to my wife as well, but I don't think she watched it, saying thank you. Individual stewardship, simple video, minute long. I thought, wow, technology can help merge names and make it individualized. I think we're going to start seeing things like virtual reality options of stewardship because we can't keep losing the people that we're losing. So this increased stewardship is going to become important. I also believe, based on this K economy, less people giving, there's going to be more structural concern around the finances of our nonprofits, that expenses are going to be hammered on in 2025 because that's what the nonprofit believes it can control. And they tend to find the fundraising activities first or amongst the first to say, well, you got to decrease. And it's like, but if I decrease my staff, I decrease revenue. There's a direct correlation between the two. We're going to have to fight that battle in these conversations. I think the other thing is that based upon, and this deals more with workforce, but what's going to happen in Washington with a real push to put people back into work in the government and in terms in an office. And I'm not judging that politically. I'm just saying that's what's probably going to happen. There's also going to be a similar push in the private sector, ours. Here's the thing. The more you're needed, the more you deliver, the more you function as a high-level employee, the more flexibility you're going to have. But I think this work at home, work-life balance, which I believe is important, there's going to be a larger push across the country to put people back in offices. We're already seeing that in some very large companies. I think it's going to promulgate itself into 2025. So that's kind of the economy in the larger perspective, and that's the biggest part of my predictions. The second major area of predictions is giving. What are we going to see? This is a terrible prediction. I apologize. I have no idea. Here's why. And it goes back to something I said a few minutes ago. That fewer and fewer people are making up a larger and larger percentage of the top end gifts. We are now beginning to see on a regular basis 8- and 9-figure gifts being given to nonprofits, certainly in the United States, but around the world. When that happens, one or two people 3 people either pass away or choose to give all of their money in that moment, or however you want to look at it, because so few people are making such a big difference. When you look at statistical analysis, that means that fewer people can move the needle when it comes to philanthropy. And I'm not predicting anything, but at some point, the legend that is Warren Buffett is going to pass. I hope it's not for another 10 years. But we know he's already articulated that his hundreds of millions of dollars in that moment is going to be transferred out of his control into nonprofits, for the most part controlled now by his choices, by his children. That is such an enormous amount of money that when that happens, that's going to move the percentages. Or if a number of large donors decide not to give anything next year, because they're going to wait for 2026, or there's I'm just saying that when you have the concentration of philanthropy happening in such a small group, a few people making decisions or a few people passing can make an enormous difference. So I don't know how to predict that. I do think that there'll be an increased knowledge, awareness, probably of dollars as well. I think based upon what I'm seeing in the economy, on emphasis on food, housing, clothing, the essentials. I think we're going to talk more about that. That insecurity of basic needs, Maslow's baselines of the hierarchy of needs, are going to become more and more important. I would also say that, as I predicted last year, and we began to see some numbers coming out even after I recorded the podcast, that climate will be another year of growth when it comes to philanthropy. So there'll be a lot of emphasis in philanthropy around, in terms of sectors, the basics: food insecurity, housing insecurity, clothing, and then I think also climate will be a very strong emphasis for the nonprofit sectors. The third and last area is industry. And these are just some what I would call miscellaneous predictions. I think you will see a greater number of mergers and closures. So in healthcare, that will be closures of departments, particularly things like maternity, maybe even surgical centers, and they will kind of pivot, particularly in rural communities, just doing EDs and stabilization and getting them into maybe the hub and spoke model, into those hubs where they can maximize the efficiency of the costs. I think that you're going to see closures of rural hospitals. I would add to that colleges, particularly small colleges, are in that same vein. You'll probably see more mergers there already for 2025. We're not even there yet. I know of 6 different mergers or closures that have already been announced. So an example is St. Ambrose in the Quad Cities is merging with another university for efficiency purposes. I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see these alliances and mergers continue. Maybe it's YMCAs, boys clubs, where there's lots of different operating centers saying we can't functionally and expense-wise continue to do this. I think there's going to be this huge push. And it's going to have an effect on communities. And I think it's probably going to have an effect on the smaller communities more than the larger communities, because in large communities you can merge things, you can kind of still drive there. You close a birthing center, which is we've seen across the country, and all of a sudden you're driving 120 miles to give birth to a child. That's tough. But I think that's where we're going to see some real push to control costs. The second major industry thing is a greater acceptance, and maybe because of circumstances, of artificial intelligence. That, number one, we're going to see more and more places say we have to accept this, even though we have a reticent group of people in the gift officers who have had a way of doing this. I equate this, if you watched Moneyball with Brad Pitt about the Oakland A's, about using Bill James's statistical analysis to figure out who are the best players to make up the best teams. And they now have different stats to figure that out. I think we're headed in that direction. The reason I use that as an example in the movie, those that were the scouts, the people who were looking for the next generation of baseball players, kept fighting this, saying, well, we know best. Well, that's the equivalent of our major gift officers. Well, we know best. We know our donors. And what the data is telling us is that we don't. We're too transactional. We're not building relationships with the right people. We're not elevating the conversations the way we should. There will be a continuation of acceptance organizationally and maybe some additional resistance by gift officers to really hone in on what artificial intelligence can do. Who should we be targeting for conversations? When are they going to give? What are they going to give to? How much are they going to give? Actually will become more in focus in this next year moving forward. We have to learn to trust this because it's going to be part of our future. So those are the predictions. So we've got the economy and the big picture about the taxes and certainly the K economy. In giving, we have predictions when it comes to really not having an idea of how to predict whether giving is going to go up or down depending on who chooses to give or whether they're required to give maybe in a state situation. And the second thing is, that we're going to see an increased emphasis on the basic needs, food, shelter, and clothing, as well as climate. And the third major sector, industry, talking about closures and mergers, and that's going to become more and more of a discussion about how do we keep costs normalized. To do that, things are going to be closed. And the last is artificial intelligence and its growth. So 3 big areas, 2 predictions in each one with sub-predictions. I'm going to keep this sheet of paper. We'll review it in a year and see how I did. The last couple of years, I've been running 80% or better on my predictions. And I get kind of specific. So I'm hoping this helps you think about your year in a meaningful way so that you can deliver that whole, the work that occurs in nonprofit work, philanthropy, between government, which isn't efficient enough, and kind of for-profit business, corporate America, which doesn't see this as a profit. We serve in that middle gap to better our communities. I'm hoping today will give you a sense of maybe some things to think about going forward. Don't forget to check out the blogs at Hallett Philanthropy, just 2 a week, www.hallettphilanthropy.com. Literally, I'm talking about all kinds of things that don't kind of reach the level of a 20-minute podcast, but could be important. I was talking about that article, really an interesting perspective on donor advised funds and some of the political pressures that may come. Also, if you want to reach out to me, it's podcast@hallettphilanthropy.com. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for making 2024 better for wherever your community is, for your nonprofit, whether you're a board member, a CEO, a gift officer, you're in the infrastructure team, whomever you are and whatever you do, you're helping people. Don't forget my favorite all-time saying. Some people make things happen. Some people watch things happen. Then there are those who wondered what happened. We are people who make things happen. You find others in your community who want to make things happen for the things, the people, the organizations that are wondering what happened. That's how we make our world a better place. Philanthropy, purely defined. Love of humankind, mankind. It's not about the money. It's about helping others and making your community a better place. And thank you for what you do for that. I'll see you on the flip side when we turn the calendar to 2025. And for all the additions that'll come, the tactical, helpful 21st century classroom that I have here with Around with Randall. Don't forget, make it a great day.